All right, so this is our next lecture, Great Promise and Bitter Disappointments, period from 1960 to 1974. Basically, we're going to be covering presidents like Kennedy, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and Richard Nixon. Now, Kennedy and the New Frontier. First president we're going to be looking at. Ready for the next slide? All right. Going into the 1960s, it seemed that America was facing a lot of constraints. I mean, the Cold War was kind of heating back up again, especially because the U-2 spy plane and Gary Powers that took whatever was improving between the U.S. and USSR and threw it away. Remember, they had launched Sputnik, so they had an edge on space. Fidel Castro, by this time, instead of going with the United States of America, he decided to ally himself with Cuba. We were in a recession in 1960, and we had a national debt of $488 billion. Even though I know we'd love to have that national debt today, that was a huge number. So going into the election, we're going to look at two different candidates. The election of 1960. Basically, the Republicans choose Eisenhower's vice president, Richard Nixon, a guy who had already begun to earn a nickname of Tricky Dick. He had a shrewd intelligence, a love for politics. He was born into a struggling Quaker family, moved into politics, and never looked back. Basically, he was very energetic, and he wanted to improve everybody's life. Got it? Meanwhile, the Democrats, they choose John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Basically, he was inexperienced, even though he did have a record of heroism from World War II. He had a glamorous wife, a Harvard education, movie star charisma, but the 43-year-old did not distinguish himself in the House or the Senate. He came from wealth, led by his father, Joseph Kennedy, who made his money from running booze during Prohibition, and then onto Wall Street. Then he invested in the Hollywood film industry, where he began to develop and preen his son to become president. But John Fitzgerald wasn't the son that he had preened to become president. The son that he had preened was John's older brother, Joseph, who, just like JFK, had gone to World War II. He was a bomber pilot, and he had flown his 50 missions and was ready to be sent back home. Well, they had a secret mission. There was this dam in the Ruhr River Valley that they needed to destroy, because this was like where most of their industry was. And if they could destroy that dam, it would deprive the factories of hydroelectric power. Well, even though they finally did figure out a bomb and a real cool raid to blow up the dam, where it spun counterwise, went down a rack, hit the water, skipped over like a stone, and hit the part of the dam that was visible on the surface, sunk down about halfway and blew up. At this point, what they thought is, hey, we'll just get a B-25 bomber, load it up with explosives and fuel. We'll get a pilot that will fly it over the English Channel. Once he's over the English Channel, he'll switch the switch over to where it becomes remote controlled. Then the pilot will parachute out of the plane and will remote control the plane into the dam. Well, Joseph Jr. said, hey, I'll take that up because that's going to make a great story. And he takes off from the landing field, makes it about 15 minutes into the flight, and suddenly the plane explodes. We have no idea why. Basically, he too was very energetic, visiting more than 25 states and giving 350 speeches. In one of his speeches, he said, we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of the unknown opportunities and perils, a frontier of unfulfilled hopes and threats. He focused on the potential of the future, as he knew Americans loved this theme. Basically, the biggest negatives about him were his age. He was only 43, and he was Catholic. Now, that may not... Do y'all think religion is actually that big of a deal now? Really? You think we could have a Muslim president? Well, we've already got Muslims and sitting in the Senate and House. Well, you know what's funny though is I remember Mitt Romney was the guy who ran against Obama. Y'all would have been wee babies. Anyway, I'd gone to like a breakfast, a men's breakfast at a church, and you know, oh, I don't like that Obama. No. Oh, but I don't know if I can vote for that Romney. Huh? Why? Oh, he's a Mormon.
It's my mom.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, it's a personal thing, and like we said, more and more people are becoming open to that. But guys, this was the first time that something like that had happened, so actually it was a huge thing back then with the Catholic. Well, Richard Nixon was foolish enough to accept that their debates be televised. This is the first presidential debates that are televised. Kennedy... Remember, he had Hollywood contacts, connections. All this was old shoe to him. He put on the stage makeup, got his hair done right. He was positioned near an air conditioning vent. Meanwhile, Nixon, who had no experience with this stuff, he didn't even shave before he went on stage for the debates. So he had a 5 o'clock shadow. He'd been sick 2 days before, and the heat of the lights was hot, so he was sweating a little bit. He looked kind of pitiful. And just to let you know, Kennedy appeared fresh and energetic. Nixon appeared like Nixon. The role of television, the results of this, if you only watch the debates on TV, 70% of the audience thought that Kennedy won the debates. If, however, you listen to this debate on radio, 90% of the radio audience thought that Nixon won. Now, also at this time, Martin Luther King Jr. had been arrested in Atlanta, him and 40 others. While the 40 others were released, King was kept on a traffic violation that he had prior. And basically, Robert Kennedy, John's younger brother, who was 35 at the time and would become his attorney general, gave the judge a call and said that if he was a decent American, he would let King out of jail by sundown. Martin Luther King Jr. gets released. The Kennedys then print out more than 2 million pamphlets letting them know what the Kennedys did for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and distributed them in black neighborhoods in the South. So then we get to the election itself. Guys, there are 78 million votes, and Kennedy only wins by 118,000. Needless to say, we don't have this big Camelot upswing. Oh, everybody, guys, he barely wins. So he can't play far right, he can't play far left, he's got to play in the center. Ready? The New Frontier. At his inauguration, he promises that he's going to attack the common enemies of man. Who are these common enemies? Why, they're tyranny, poverty, disease, war. In this speech, he gave the famous quote, "It's not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." There's Nixon going, "That should have been me." Right? Okay, so his presidential style. Kennedy believes that problems needed to be solved by experts. So rather than going to people that had lots of experience, dealing with that governmental agency. Instead, he brings in like Rhodes Scholars and Harvard professors to solve the problems that are besetting America. And he basically said that their lack of experience, just like my lack of experience, is a good thing. Now, if you guys have, in your lives, have you ever had a president that really had a lack of experience and they tried to play it as a good thing? Huh? Trump didn't have had no political experience whatsoever. Obama, he really didn't have a lot of political experience. Bush, he didn't have a lot of political. Biden, he's got a lot of political experience. But guys, why do people vote for people like Trump or people like Obama? How can you push off this lack of experience as a good thing? Yeah, I'm not corrupted by the political swamp. You know, who was it? Trump kept calling Washington, D.C. the swamp. He was going to drain. So like I told you, Kennedy had to rule basically from the virtual center. Now he did get some of his domestic policies passed. For example, he got a minimum wage of $1.25 an hour, as well as an extension of unemployment benefits. The urban renewal bill was more than $6 million that was spent to help economically disadvantaged areas in cities across the USA. And while he got those things passed, some of his other advances were bottlenecked. And they didn't make the cut through Congress. Ready for the next one? Well, he was going to bring in a new economics. Basically, you shape national policies through taxes. Now, have you guys ever seen where they tried to shape national policies through taxes? Well, I'll tell you how it happened. Smoking used to be a big killer. So what did the government do to try to get people to stop smoking? Yeah, more than double the tax on it. So cigarettes went from being like $2 a pack to $6. Okay, and guess what? It worked. People stopped smoking. Well, but guess what's the biggest killer now? Obesity. So they might pass a fast food tax. And before you think, oh, that's crazy, Professor Galloway, they're not going to do it. In New York City, to cut down on obesity, you can't buy a fountain drink bigger than 32 ounces. You can buy two 32-ounce drinks, but you can't buy a drink bigger than... And in Portland, they doubled the tax on sodas to get people to make wiser choices. So guess what the people of Portland do? They drive to another town to buy their Cokes. They go to, the sad thing is though, if you're a local restaurant and you want to have a Coke with dinner, you're not going to Portland because it's going to cost you that much more. You'll drive it 15 or 30 minutes out. Anyway, but it does work. And like we said, it's worked with smoking. They tried to shape national policies. Oh, no. The defense budget has increased 20%. Unemployment here in America falls 2%. And they try to put in national and wage guidelines for the workplace. Now, U.S. Steel said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to comply. Basically, then they brought the weight of the U.S. government against U.S. Steel, which was the world's largest steel producer. And U.S. Steel said, okay, and they complied. And In 1978, the world's largest steel producer basically went bankrupt and closed its doors. Even though there was some talking about getting it started again. You ready? I will leave it there, because that's where the other classes got up to. Even though I could tell you about Thurgood Marshall. Let's rock and roll. Okay, now the first thing we'll talk about is Kennedy and civil rights. Civil rights was never really close to the heart of John F. Kennedy. It was to his brother, Robert, who was the youngest, at 35, was the youngest attorney general we've ever had. His moves were very cautious, because once again, he was elected by just a few hundred, or 168,000 votes. But he did make some achievements, like Thurgood Marshall, an African-American lawyer, was put on the Supreme Court, making him America's first black justice. And while he did do that historic move, at the very same time, he would promote segregationist judges to appease his constituents. And even though he was given the chance, he didn't ban racial segregation in federal housing. Now, just because he wasn't ready, does that mean the people weren't ready? No, the people were going to go ahead and do what they wanted to do. You have this new wave of black activism starting to use a sit-down movement, where basically you go in and you sit down in a chair and you take up space. This happened in Greensboro, North Carolina, at the Woolworth lunch counter, when 4 black students went in and sat in the all-white section. This happened on February 1st, 1960, and within a week, the sit-in movement had spread to 6 more towns in North Carolina, and within 2 months, demonstrations had occurred in 54 cities and 9 states. And the spread throughout the South. Well, then you have CORE, or the Congress of Racial Equality, together with King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference, went out and started practicing militant nonviolence. Where the protesters would refuse to retaliate, even when struck with clubs or poked with cattle prods. The sit-ins, as they pushed for the integration of public facilities, the sit-ins at churches became kneel-ins at churches and wade-ins at segregated public schools. During the years after the Greensboro sit-ins, more than 3,600 black and white activists spent some time in jail. Some were pelted with rocks, burned with cigarettes, and subjected to unending verbal abuses. But like I told you, this movement is spreading beyond just the South into 140 cities overall, like cities in Nevada, Ohio, and up in Illinois. You even had one group called the Freedom Riders that basically was going to work on segregation in public facilities by taking interstate bus trips, like from Nashville, Tennessee, down to Birmingham, Alabama. Now, why is it so important that they did it interstate? Because basically any commerce that's interstate, which means between 2 or more states instead of intrastate in just one. The federal government has oversight over interstate. State governments have over intra. So the Freedom Riders said that they were going to get tickets and challenge segregation on interstate buses. And once again, these are whites and blacks together. Well, what was the reaction to this? Well, in Greensboro, that Woolworth, it opened after just 1 week because they needed the money. And it was desegregated. For the Freedom Riders, however, in Alabama, mobs attacked the travelers with fists and pipes. They burned one of the buses and assaulted Justice Department observers. Meanwhile, Eugene Bull Connor wouldn't hesitate to use force, like with attack dogs, tear gas, electric cattle prods, fire hoses. And again, you had the crowds giving out slurs and epithets. This was when, in 1963, when King launched a number of nonviolent protests in Birmingham. Basically, he was arrested and taken to jail on Good Friday of 1963. And in jail, he wrote a letter from a Birmingham city jail where he stated, "One who breaks an unjust law must do so lovingly and with a willingness to accept the penalty." And he also knew that freedom was never given voluntarily by the oppressor. But hereafter, after this arrest, basically Martin Luther King Jr. changed his tactics, and where he began to emphasize the importance of educating Southern whites about the injustice of segregation. He focused on gaining federal enforcement by provoking racists to display their bitter hatreds in public. Indeed, it caused King to grow so much in stature that the head of the FBI labeled King the most dangerous Negro of the future of this nation. But for his nonviolent coercion, it earned him a Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. And perhaps the height of his movement here in the States was at the March on Washington, where on August 28, 1963, more than 250,000 blacks and whites gathered in the Washington Mall. He gave a speech from the Lincoln Memorial, his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, where that one day people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. So you ready for a mind bender? Was President Obama then a fulfillment of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream?
Like what do you mean?
Huh?
Like what do you mean?
Well, because he's America's first black president, so is he a fulfillment of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream?
I feel like that's subjective.
That's a trick question, kind of.
Oh.
Because if you say yeah, it's like, well, what are you basing that on? The color of his skin or the content of his character?
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll reach there one day, if we haven't already. Was America ready for it, however? No. How do we know? Just 2 days later, these 4 girls who showed up at church early, because one had new gloves that she wanted to show her friends. There was a bomb in the church. It exploded, killing the 4 girls. Now, why do you think the church was attacked? Did you go to church? You do? Okay, so why attack a church? What's so special about a church? Yeah, a lot of people go there. You know them. They know you. You're kind of a community. And if somebody in the church is hurting or if somebody passed away, you know, you don't have to like everybody in your church. Not everybody has to like you, but you're a community. And together, you can achieve things. And guys, it's just an attempt to break up the community, break up their strength. All right, diplomatically. Kennedy had a flexible response. What do we mean by this? Well, remember, the Cold War was kind of on the increase because of what happened with Gary Powers getting shot down. So in order to make us feel more comfortable, there's a 20% increase in our defense spending. There's an increase in how many nuclear weapons we have. We now have even more. As for the space race, he issues the challenge. That was a shocking challenge. But he said, by the end of the decade, we will have a man on the moon. How are we going to treat nations that are friendly to us? Well, we'll give them aid. Economic, military, humanitarian. And so much did John F. Kennedy believe in this, that in March of 1961, he started the Peace Corps, which basically was Americans would go to third world countries and help give them advice, dig wells, etc. Now, what are we going to do to our enemies? Well, you can't go out and attack them in the open, but you can use the CIA to destabilize their governments. So you can kind of keep the status quo in the Cold War years. Well, Latin America was a place where there was a lot of tension. The Soviets and the Cubans were sending a lot of people, like Cuba sent Che Guevara down there to try to build up more support for communism. Well, we started the Alliance for Progress, where once again we're helping out governments that are friendly to us and capitalism. Meanwhile, when Fidel Castro took over Cuba and decided to go with the communists, a lot of the Cubanos left Cuba, especially those that had wealth or had achieved high position underneath Bautista. And they had absolutely no love for Fidel Castro. Well, we decided we'd make use of it, and we trained 1,500 Cuban exiles. The CIA trained them, gave them military training, and the reason why we used 1,500 is because that's how many Cubanos Fidel had when he had his revolution. And we wanted this to appear like a counter-revolution. So we even landed the troops at the Bay of Pigs, which is where Fidel Castro started his revolution. Well, we promised that we'd give them air support, but at the last second we said, you know what, if we want it to look like we're not involved, that's not going to be good, and that might bring up like Soviet ire. So we didn't give them the air support. And our guys, unfortunately, by 3 days, they were massacred. They were either killed or taken prisoner, which made us look like fools to our friends and cowards to our enemies. In Asia, we're using the CIA to destabilize the communist governments of China and North Vietnam. Now, how is the CIA just doing this? The CIA is doing this through fake companies like Air America and Laos, that to the public it was supposed to be a private charter flight place you could rent, but in reality it was a CIA cover. And under this, Kennedy has a meeting with Khrushchev. Now remember, Khrushchev was in charge of the defenses at Stalingrad. He was the guy that ordered that the NKVD, or a Soviet kind of secret guard, would stand behind the army, and if any of the Russian guys tried to retreat, the NKVD would shoot them and kill them. So he's tough, and he knows, you know, he thought he had a good relationship going with Eisenhower, till you had Gary Powers, and that whole debacle. So he's really gonna stand strong and tough against 43-year-old Joseph Kennedy, John Kennedy. Ready? So you have a Cold War buildup, where both us and the Soviets are building up our troops. Then, 2 months, Khrushchev started to limit access to Berlin. And then he builds a wall separating East Berlin from everything else. And then on October 15th, we get pictures from one of our spy planes that had flown over Cuba that they were building missile launch sites. Now, what would the danger be of there being missiles, Soviet missiles, in Cuba?
Because Cuba's like not around like
Yeah, their missiles could be launched and land before we had time to even react. You know, like I told you last lecture, England, it had 3 minutes if Russia ever launched missiles at them. Now, we had missiles in Turkey that were basically for the exact same reason, that we could launch before Russia could do anything about it, or the USSR. And Kennedy was planning to pull them out, but as soon as this was revealed, no way. He keeps the missiles there. He sends the Navy down to Cuba to basically not allow any Soviet ships in, but we can't call it a blockade because that's a military term, so they call it a quarantine. And I mean, tensions are high because the USSR, those boats are coming. And Khrushchev is making it seem like they are not going to stop. And then the day before the ships get to cross the line, we get a message from the Soviets that it looks like it was from Khrushchev. Maybe he'd had something to drink. He was like, hey, let's not do this. Let's sit down and have discussions, you know, not take the world to the precipice of thermonuclear. That came when it was late at night in Russia. Then by the time it would be early morning in Russia, we get another message that says, we're going to cross the line and we're going to darn you, and if we have to go to nuclear war, it's on your head. Now, how did America respond to this diplomatically? The way they did was brilliant. And let's say this. Let's say there's a guy that you really like, and let's say that you asked out guys, and prom was coming up, the senior prom. And 2 months before, you'd send a message, hey, are you going to prom? Would you like to go with me? You're not getting any message back. Nothing. Then, on the Sunday night before the Monday that prom week begins, you get a message saying, hey, yeah, we really need to go to prom together. It's going to be a great night. I'm going to have so much fun. Let's do this. So you're like, yeah, he wants to go. And then the next morning, you get another message like you might be in the parking lot here at school, and you get another text, and you open it, and it's, hey, we are not going to prom. We're not going together. Now, if you really want to go to prom with him, what are you going to do?
Okay.
Huh?
I just said, okay.
No. You act like you never got the second message. You
I
say,
decided to prom all by myself.
Say what?
I just have to show up to prom all by myself.
No, but see, if you go up to him, because he's going to be here, so if you just go up to him and you act like you never got the second message, and he's like, you're like, hey, that's great that you want to go to prom. This is going to be fun. And he'll go like, didn't you get my message? Yeah, I got your message you sent last night. So let's do this. Da, 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 da. And that's basically what we did to the Soviets. Yeah, we do need to sit there. Because basically that diplomatically offered them a way out. Diplomatically it offered us a way out. And by October 27, 1962, we'd worked out an agreement. They promised that they wouldn't put missiles in Cuba. We in turn promised, and we did, withdraw our missiles from Turkey. And that was kind of like a little opening that by June of 1963, we worked out an agreement between the two nations that we're both going to stop nuclear testing. Or at least nuclear testing in the atmosphere. We could still do it underground, but not in the open. Now, one thing we didn't know, however, was that the Soviets had already sent nuclear warheads to Cuba by a submarine. And to show you that, I'm going to show you a clip of Fog of War by McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense. And we'll be right back with the lecture after the clip. Okay. Then we get to Vietnam. And in Vietnam, we had a commitment there. We had to stay there. Why? Because of containment. Because North Vietnam was communist, South Vietnam was capitalist. We had to stay strong against communism. But it was proving ever more challenging. Why? Because of Ngo Dinh Diem, the guy that we chose to lead South Vietnam. He seemed to be more interested in trying to persecute the Buddhist population that lived in Vietnam, building up more support for Catholics, then paying attention to either economic policies or stopping the communist insurgents. He's losing control. So they needed more U.S. troops and military advisors. And by November of 1963, we had already invested or spent more than $185 million on Vietnam. Okay. So on June 10th, 1963, a Buddhist monk went and sat outside the U.S. Embassy in Saigon and basically committed self-immolation. He poured a can of gasoline over himself and lit a match, burning himself to death. To show you how distant and perhaps callous Diem and his family were to the plight of the Buddhists, Diem's sister-in-law called it a Buddhist barbecue. And basically on November 1st, 1963, a group of his generals carried out a coup d'etat, murdering Diem. But basically these generals that faced continual coup d'etats were no more successive in trying to run the country. Ready for the next one? Then we get to his death in Dallas. Now, what the heck was Kennedy doing in Dallas? What was he doing in Texas? Well, he was languishing. He needed to build up his popularity. I mean, his economic plans weren't working. His popularity was going down. So he arrived in Texas on November 21st, spending the night, going to Houston. Then he went to San Antonio, spoke there. Then he went to Austin, spoke there. Then he went to Fort Worth, spent the night, woke up, had a breakfast speech in Fort Worth, drove over here to Dallas, and that's when he was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald from the book depository. And he was killed and assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. There was nobody else. I've even heard people say the reason why Jimmy Hoffa was killed is because he knew who actually killed him. No, sorry. It was Lee Harvey Oswald. Because Oswald also shot Tippit on his way over. Now, you know some of the weird coinky-dinkies between Lincoln and Kennedy.
Yeah, I've heard them. I don't remember them.
They both have 7 letters in their name.
I don't believe in all that conspiracy stuff.
No, but they're weird. Like they were both elected 100 years apart, 1860, 1960. Kennedy right there, he's in a Lincoln Continental. The guy who, Lincoln was assassinated in a theater, and his assassin fled to a barn or a storage place. Kennedy was shot from a storage place or the book depository, and his assassin ran to a theater, the Texas Theater down in Oak Cliff. Now, if there are questions, he, of course, Lee Harvey Oswald totally denied it, and we couldn't really ask him any questions or put him on trial, because 2 days after this, as he was being transported from the Dallas City Jail to a more secure facility, Jack Ruby, who happened to slip into the basement when the cop who was guarding it moved up to try to stop the traffic so the paddy wagon could get out. He just happened to be in. Jack Ruby was a strip club owner. He had just gone down to the Western Union Telegraph office to wire one of the strippers some money so she could pay rent. And he went into the Dallas Police Department, that basement there. They were bringing out Oswald, and Oswald, and he shot him. Jack Ruby dies of cancer in prison 2 years later.
I think one of my dad's my dad knows a guy that, he either talked to a guy whenever he was like a police officer or something like that. He knows like a guy that, was on the scene whenever they went to the theater or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that is weird. Well, and then, you know why he got caught for going into the theater? Because he didn't pay for his ticket. He just snuck into the theater. And also, he was acting a little bit, apparently, according to the guy that was selling tickets at the theater, he was acting a little bit curious out on the street. But he went in without paying for his ticket, so he called the cops. And he pointed out to the cops, that's the guy that didn't buy his movie theater ticket. Which a lot of people build up to the conspiracy. He wanted to get caught. No, whatever. All right, so now Kennedy's gone, and there's a new sheriff in town, beyond the new frontier. Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, Johnson was a Texan who could adapt himself to fit occasions. He was a worker and achiever, animated by greed, ambition, and an all-consuming lust for power. He was an overbearing man capable of ruthlessness and deceit, but he also could be warm, caring, generous, friendly, and he actually did have a genuine concern for the disadvantaged. I mean, he'd been born dirt poor, and he always felt his first job was teaching Mexican-American students here in Texas. Basically, when he got into office, there were 93 million American families, or 20% of the population, that were living below the poverty line of $3,000 a year for a family of 4. Johnson stated in his first State of the Union speech, "Unfortunately, many Americans live on the outskirts of hope, some because of their poverty, some because of their color, and all too many because of both." LBJ claimed this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America. Basically, he wanted to build a better society where progress is servant of the neediest. Here he is taking the oath of office on Air Force One, and that is John F. Kennedy's wife right there next to him, Jackie. Well, one of the first things that he gets passed that proves there is no systemic racism is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that made it illegal to discriminate for reasons of race, religion, or gender. Now, this was a huge leap forward. How could he get this by the American people? Well, basically, he said it was Kennedy's idea. And everybody's feeling so bad about the fallen president. He said, let there be no memorial or eulogy for Kennedy other than this act. That Kennedy could have cared less about this act. But he used the body of the dead president to get it passed. And he starts his war on poverty and building the Great Society. Basically, he wanted to attack both racial injustice as well as poverty, because poverty knows no color. What are you going to do if you want to get people out of being poor? You have to expand the opportunity and improve their social environment. The chief weapon that they're going to use are better schools. He starts programs like Job Corps, which basically is vocational training for inner city. He started the Vista programs and Head Start. Basically to try to get all these people to get themselves out of poverty. Now, the way this kind of works is, I got this waste paper basket here, and imagine that every seat in this classroom is filled, okay? And this is the American dream, fulfillment of it, prosperity and all that stuff. So everybody in this room has a right to crinkle up a piece of paper and throw it in there. If they make it in the shop, they're going to have it made. Now, is this fair for everybody? Because everybody in the class can do it. Everybody in the class can do it. Yeah, not only that, like, let's say that guy right there, he's from Highland Park. He's got contacts, he goes to a great school, he's probably been to other countries, he's been to museums, boom, bum, boom. You're from Plano. Huh? Not that difficult for you. You know, they might be from Frisco, you know. They might be from, I don't know, North Dallas, huh? McKinney, so on. But see, then when you start getting further back, we got like Mesquite, Garland, Irving, South Oak Cliff, well, Dallas before South Oak Cliff, Kermit, Texas, which is the poorest county in Texas. But the job is you want to create programs and everything like that to help people move them forward, advance them to increase their chances of getting ball in the basket. Now, needless to say, this is a huge thing to do. But he tries to do this because he's the president, but that's just because Kennedy got assassinated. And if you remember, Kennedy was going around trying to get elected in 1964. Well, now LBJ has to fight to get elected as well. Who are the people that are against him? It's Barry Goldwater and the New Right. Basically, Barry Goldwater was a 1960 millionaire department store magnate. He proposed abolition of the income tax, the sale of the TVA, a total overhaul of Social Security. Remember, the TVA is what provided power for the Tennessee River. He wanted a wholesale bombing of North Vietnam. And he opposed both the nuclear test ban that we had created with the Soviets, as well as the Civil Rights Act. Like basically they felt that a lot of the programs, like especially the New Deal and all those government programs, had localism, self-help, and individualism were all being destroyed. Now, can you see how a government program could do that? Like, let's talk, what's this right here? Yeah, why are we wearing a mask? Because of COVID. Oh, yeah. Now, wait a minute. During COVID, they had to first off, they had to shut down the churches, but they also had to shut down a lot of stores, didn't they? Most of these were the mom and pop stores. You know, the little Maria's Tacos, you know, or Henry's Toy Store, Hobby Shop, you know. All those guys were shut down. A lot of those guys couldn't make it. They had to go bankrupt. Walmart could stay open. Walgreens could stay open. Kroger. Now the government programs put all the little guys out of work. So would it be fair if we started a new government program saying that Walmart, Walgreens, all those had to be closed for 6 months so all that economy could go back to the local mom and pops?
That'd be a little crazy.
It would be crazy. Small business owners would love it. But basically that's showing you the power of government and how it can hurt the little guy. Basically, they said that the Supreme Court had violated constitutional power. I love this popular political cartoon right here where Goldwater's looking down at a mom and her kids that might be homeless. It said, if you had any incentive, you'd go out and inherit a department store. Because that's what he did. He married into it. Now, what was so threatening about the Supreme Court? Well, the Supreme Court at this time was the Warren Court, because it was named after Chief Justice Earl Warren. And Earl Warren put an emphasis on individual rights. You had cases like Yates v. United States, where 14 communists were released. Gideon v. Wainwright, basically Gideon v. Wainwright was the case where poor people would be provided with an attorney at taxpayers' expense. In Miranda v. Illinois, have you ever heard of the Miranda rights? If you get pulled over, you have to be read your Miranda rights, which are like you have the right to be silent. Anything you say can and will be held you against the court of law. Blah, 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 blah. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot put forward one will be provided to you. Well, why did cops have to read that? Because of what they did to Miranda. Basically, he was caught red-handed, walking out of the store that he had stolen all this stuff from. So they arrest him, they take him to the jail, they say sign a confession. He refuses to do it. So they don't let him get up, they don't let him go to the bathroom, they don't let him go to sleep. He's like that for 40 hours. Finally, after 40 hours, exhausted in pants that are, soaked in urine and poo-poo, he writes out his confession. Well, they find him guilty. It's appealed, goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says you cannot do that. You have to let people know their rights. And as funny thing is, though, as soon as Miranda was found not guilty, you know what the Arizona cops did? They went and arrested him because there were other charges that they hadn't filed against him. But they read him his Miranda rights. Basically, the emphasis of this court was that the government had to follow due process if it was going to deprive the citizens, the individual, of their liberties or property. Now, what were the threats of the court? Well, the court had already allowed the distribution of sexually explicit material when a guy by the name of Hugh Hefner had a little magazine he called Playboy that sent nude photos of girls. It was allowed to be distributed. Prayer was forbidden in school. They ruled against New York, saying that basically you have to have a separation between church and state. Some places were not allowing Bibles, and they were permitting contraceptives. So as you can guess, to a lot of conservatives, this was pretty shocking stuff. So in Johnson versus Goldwater, you had the Goldwater ad, in your heart you know he's right, compared to Johnson's ad, in your guts you know he's nuts. And Johnson also released one television ad the night before the election. It was only shown once, and it's called the Daisy ad. Needless to say, it's a sweeping victory for Johnson. He got 61% of the total votes, 486 electoral votes to Goldwater's 52. However, he knew that his grace period wouldn't be long. He said, we've got to get this legislation limit. He said, every day I'm in office, I'm going to lose votes. I'm going to alienate somebody. We've got to get this legislation fast. You've got to get it during my honeymoon. Usually they call the first 30 to 100 days of a president their honeymoon. So from 1960 to 1968, they're able to put more than 60 programs into place, providing better economic and social opportunity. And the removal of barriers, preventing some from having access. And he wouldn't hesitate to use Martin Luther King Jr. to achieve what he wanted to achieve. All right. So what did we get up to last lecture? As you were the only one here.
Notes.
There we go. And y'all's final is probably going to be on the 14th because Eid is on the 12th and the 13th. Eid is your reward for having gone through Ramadan.
It's going to be online?
Mm-hmm. But we'll have a review on Tuesday, the 11th, I believe. Okay, where did we get up to?
I think after this one.
Okay. So basically, coming in after Johnson was reelected, he has Freedom Summer, in which blacks and whites together, usually these are college grads, go down to economically depressed areas in the South to teach at freedom schools that provide summer school education for the students. And was it accepted? In a word, no. From June to August of 1964, at the freedom schools, there was more than 35 shootings, 30 buildings were bombed, hundreds were beaten, and 6 were killed. And if you're interested in seeing a movie about an investigation that was done on 3 activists that were kidnapped and murdered, the movie Missing came out something like 88, 89, 90, ages ago. Ready for the next one? Well, then you have the Freedom March that took place from Selma to Montgomery. This is when 1965, when Martin Luther King announced a drive to enroll 3 million blacks in the South to register to vote. Basically, beginning in Selma, Alabama, civil rights protesters began a march to Montgomery. However, Jim Clark and 50 state troopers, you had to cross through a bridge to get into Montgomery. They refused to have the crowd go over. All this is being televised as they beat the protesters with clubs, utilizing whips and tear gas. Well, is Johnson a fan of this? No. His reaction was to immediately activate the National Guard and 2 Army battalions to ensure that the bridge would be open, and 250 field marshals from the district attorney's office. And by March 25th, Montgomery was reached with 35,000 people ready to register to vote. He got the Voting Rights Act passed, and as he's presenting it before Congress, he ended his presentation by repeating, "And we shall overcome." What did this bill do? It ensured the rights of all citizens to vote, authorizing the Attorney General to dispatch federal examiners to register voters. The act suspended literacy tests and other devices that have been used to defraud citizens of the right to vote. And what are the results of this? Well, by the end of the year, 250,000 blacks were newly registered to vote. Now, of course, there were other programs that were put into place, like the Appalachian Regional Development Act, in an attempt to alleviate this historically and chronically impoverished region of the United States. The Model Cities Act was basically to help develop impoverished areas, urban blight. Housing bill made it easier for Americans to get home. You had a lot of urban and mass transit development, opening up transportation to the people. Now, the Immigration Return Act, that sounds like, hey, we're trying to get rid of immigrants. No, it is the exact opposite. Basically, the Immigrant Return Act totally did away with national quotas and quota systems that have been used to help European immigration here and kind of harm immigration from other continents. This totally did away with all national quotas. And we got the Medical Care Act that had Medicaid or Medicare for the aged. Basically, it provided medical insurance for those over 65, and Medicaid for the impoverished and the indigent. And when Johnson signed the bill on June 30th, 1965, in Independence, Missouri, an 81-year-old Harry Truman was looking on. You read it? Now his wife, Lady Bird, was there to help as well with like the National Wildlife Preservation Act. It put fines on the killing of certain species. And the Clean Water Restoration Act was passed to help clean up the polluted rivers of New England especially, but polluted rivers everywhere. Here in Texas, a legacy of Lady Bird Johnson is all the wildflowers you see as you're driving down the highway or a farm to market road. Basically, she started putting wildflowers there. And indeed, there's a huge seed nursery in Austin that's used to store all these wildflower seeds. Ready for the next one? Well, by 1966, though, LBJ is losing popularity. Why? Well, part of it is the war in Vietnam. Another part of it is the partisan politics, especially when he allowed so many people to finally start having freedoms and everything like that. Well, it breaks down things into partisan politics, where groups wanted more things for their group, which led to infighting with other groups and everything like that. And by 1968, America is ready for a change. New agendas. Now, there were a lot of people, especially in the African American community, that felt like the equality that was promised was too slow in arriving. Basically, they lived in a world of poverty and false hopes. Nowhere can this be seen clearer than in the Watts riot that took place less than a week after the Voting Rights Act had been passed. What's Watts? Well, it's an area of Los Angeles, largely populated by African Americans, about 250,000, 34% of which were totally unemployed. And it began on August 11th when there was a struggle, or an arrest that led to a struggle, that led to more and more people coming out, destruction of property, then comes the National Guard, and basically this breaks down into a frenzy of riots and looting that at its end left 34 dead, 4,000 in jail, and $35 to $40 million in property damage. And guys, this isn't in the South. In this period, it's not in the southern cities. Indeed, you also had riots occurring in like Chicago, Cleveland, and 40 other cities, with perhaps the most graphic example being Detroit, where army tanks rolled through the city streets and soldiers have to use machine guns to deal with snipers. Basically, with this Black Power uprising, you had people saying, hell, we don't need no damn dreams, we want jobs. The Black Power movement basically was a new cry from those who had become disenchanted with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We reject the American dream defined by white people and must work to construct an American reality defined by Afro-Americans. You had like the Black Panthers, that if he posed with a smile, meet him with a smile. If he posed with a gun, meet him with a gun. They would walk around with bandoliers on, with shotguns, with rifles. And if someone got pulled over for arrest in their neighborhood, word would spread through the streets quickly, and the Black Panthers would show up with their rifles and guns, standing about 50 feet away from the arrest site, but making sure nothing happened. They started like breakfast programs for local kids before school. Just like Black Lives Matter, its founders were Marxists. The founders of the Black Panther Party were also Marxists. You had guys like Bob Moses that defected from Dr. Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You had Stokely Carmichael, a 25-year-old graduate of Harvard, basically saying, I'm not going to beg the white man for anything I deserve, I'm going to take it. Like I told you, more and more people were becoming critical of Dr. Martin Luther King. Like a lot of African Americans began to call him Dr. Chicken Wing. Meanwhile, a lot of whites, not a lot, both sides are, it's just a fraction. But some whites were doing stuff like putting out propaganda like Martin Luther King at communist training school. You know, stuff like that always happens when you try to be a peacemaker. Both sides will hate you. Ready for the next one? Then you have the rise of the black Muslims. Their leader was the Elijah Muhammad, who by 1960 had more than 100,000 members or congregants. Now, some of his members spread the word. Some of them were prisoners. And these prisoners would spread the word to fellow prisoners. That's when a young Malcolm Little, he was converted while he was in prison. He changed his name from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X. And he was a very eloquent speaker, but he was a very militant. And indeed, it's kind of sad. He, like I said, he was very smart. One of the things he said, let's see if I can find it. He said, the worst crime the white man has committed has been to teach us to hate ourselves. However, he found out that the Elijah Muhammad was like sleeping with his secretaries, and he had like 7 illegitimate children. And so he kind of split with the black Muslims. Also, he took a trip to Mecca. He saw a rainbow of diversity that the Muslim world contained, and that kind of softened his militant views. And when the black Muslims threw him out of his house, this is him because they said you got 1 day to get out of your house. He's sitting here with his rifle, afraid that the black Muslims are going to do something to him or his family. And 2 months after he did leave the black Muslims, he was gunned down and shot by a black Muslim when he was at one of the, it's not a church. What do you call where Muslims worship? Mosque. Sorry. Boy. Oh, and the Black Panthers I already told you about. Can't believe I forgot that one. So Malcolm X was killed in 1965. Then, early morning, April 4th, shot rings out in the Memphis sky. Martin Luther King Jr. is killed. There's a young Jesse Jackson, who's a African-American leader in the modern, and he kind of took over the mantle of this. He was gunned down by a white James Earl Ray, even though James Earl Ray said, well, I didn't do it. And Henrietta King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife, said, I don't think he did. He did it. He did it. And what's interesting is now this hotel where he was shot at, it's been turned into a civil rights museum. So you can see that if you go up to Memphis.
Wait, his wife said that he did it?
Said that James Earl Ray wasn't his assassin. You can sell more books that way. You can, say it was the government, say it was the FBI, even though there's no proof or evidence. I mean, why do people say that Oswald didn't shoot Kennedy? It was Jimmy Hoffa. That's he knew who killed him. That's why he was disappointed. Yeah, right. All right, the tragedy of Vietnam. All right, now guys, remember, getting into Vietnam, we felt as if we were under attack by communists. Our whole thing had been stand strong against them. Well, under Kennedy, they built up the Berlin Wall. We lost Cuba. And so what are we going to do with Vietnam? Well, basically it has new levels of intensity and destruction. Even though Johnson described Vietnam as a raggedy, fourth-rate country not worthy of American blood, we're sending troops there because, well, I'll say that in just a second. In 1965, we had 184,000. In 1966, we have 385,000. And by 1969, we have more than 500,000 troops, 542,000 in Vietnam. Well, how did we get so many people over there? Well, that's because of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, or an incident that happened in the Gulf of Tonkin. Here's Hanoi. This is Vietnam. That would have been northern Vietnam, probably right about there, because there's Hue. This would have been South Vietnam. Anyway, the Gulf of Tonkin is right there. On August 2nd, one of our destroyers, the USS Maddox, was there. And you can see a picture. Here are the 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats that shelled the Maddox. They shell it. There is no doubt about that. Well, they call in the USS Sea Turner Joy, another destroyer. And on August 4th, it's kind of a stormy day. And instead of me telling you about what happened, why don't I allow Robert McNamara, our Secretary of Defense, tell you what? Okay, so on August 4th, we believe these 2 ships were attacked, even though they weren't, but we didn't know it at the time. We were attacked on the 2nd. Well, basically, Johnson uses the belief that we were attacked then to take legislation before Congress, known as the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, and ask them for the authority to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression, which basically was like a declaration of war. And Congress agreed. Now what we needed though was increased bombing. Why? Because we wanted to destroy the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which basically was like animal paths and just hacked out of the forests that they were using to get supplies and men from North Vietnam through Laos, a little bit of Cambodia, down into South Vietnam. Well, that need for increased bombing came when the Viet Cong attacked Pleiku on February 5th, 1965, killing 8 Americans, wounding 126. And we began a massive sustained bombing of North Vietnam called Operation Rolling Thunder. Indeed, throughout the whole Vietnamese conflict, we dropped 8 times more bombs in Vietnam than we did in all of World War II. And according to our report, 6 months later, it basically didn't really impede traffic at all along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So General William Westmoreland, the guy who was in charge of our troops, our military commander in Vietnam, began sending out search and destroy missions. And as our combat missions increased, so do our casualties, as well as a body count of the enemy dead. Everybody got it? Now, why were we in Vietnam? Well, we were there because we had a promise to keep. We had a promise not only to South Vietnam, but to everybody in the world that was struggling against communism. We had, remember, we were containment. We had to stand strong wherever they stood up. And to leave Vietnam to its fate would shake the confidence of all the peoples of the value of American commitment. And we were afraid that if we lost Vietnam, all the other nations in here would fall to communism like a bunch of dominoes. Oh, and by the way, just to let you know, when North Vietnam finally does win the war over South Vietnam, both Cambodia and Laos are taken over by dictators that commit wholesale slaughter on their own people. Now, but what is the paradox of American commitment? Well, we were there not so much to win, but to avoid losing. Wait a minute, why? Okay, Vietnam was an Asiatic country divided into a north and a south. Now, we could bomb them, we could shell them with our navy, but we couldn't send a lot of army troops up there. Now, why is that? Well, let's see if we can remember. Was there another Asian country that was also divided between the North and the South? And the North attacked the South, and then our armies helped this republic fend off that invasion and went into the North and struck them so hard and pressed in so deep. And another Asian country said, and then all of a sudden they sent a flood of their troops down, beating our troops back to where at the end of this 3-year-long conflict, no ground was really exchanged. What was that other Asian country? Well, what was that? What's the Asian country I'm talking about? Huh? Korea. And what was the country that came to the aid of North Korea? China. And if we look over here at Vietnam, China's nowhere near Vietnam, right? China's right there. So guys, if we go in here, we're afraid we're going to bring down China. And China now is a much more modern nation than it was back then. So basically we had to keep from losing, avoid defeat, because we couldn't really go up and attack a lot in the north. We were afraid that we'd bring down Chinese action. Now, of course, also, we have television going on at this time. And see, the military didn't really know how to deal with reporters. So what they did is they would embed a reporter with a unit. So he'd get to be with the unit, he could film the meeting, he could film them, going out and shooting, he could film them getting wounded, he could film them wounding other people, he could film them burning down enemy huts with flamethrowers. And all this stuff was being shown on TV. If y'all are 17 years old, you might have a brother that went off to Vietnam, came back missing an arm. If he came back at all. Okay? And all the guys that would be in this class would be scared senseless. And they might be opening it up to women too soon. What do men have to do on their 18th birthday that women don't as of now, but they probably will soon? Go equality. Men have to go up and sign up for the draft. We have to sign up for the Selective Service Act. 18th birthday, go to the post office, fill out the stuff, send it in. That way you can get financial aid for college or whatever. And see, all your fellow classmates, they'd be sitting there, they'd be looking at that TV, they'd be going, that's me. And y'all might know some people in your high school that went over there. And they came back a little off in the head. Some of them may not have come back at all. Some of them may come back fine. Okay? But, guys, why do you think the military doesn't do that anymore? We don't, with the war, we're currently in war in Afghanistan, in America's longest war that beat out Vietnam. Do they show the body bags coming to them? No. They don't show the caskets. No. When we see shots of the war, it's always like a shot taken from a drone camera. And you'll see a truck going. It's just a truck. There's not people in it. It's just a truck. And you'll see a missile go, boom. And that's it. No blood, no bodies, no nothing. You might see a bomb coming out of a plane and hitting a building. Boom. But people are never hurt. Nothing like that. We've sanitized it. You don't want your citizenry to know too much of the horrors of war. But they hadn't learned that trick with Vietnam. And the biggest turning point in Vietnam was the Tet Offensive. And is anybody here Vietnamese? Hey, Tet is in his house. Guys, if ever you get a chance in college, or if she's nice enough next year, go over to her house during Tet. I mean, they don't celebrate a lot of holidays, except for New Year. And each culture has their own deal. And does Vietnam, do they have, because I know in China, they'll what's going on in Beijing, what's going on, and everybody over here will be watching it, how they're celebrating it. Now there's food everywhere, laughter, talking. Anyway, it's a big hooping deal. Both the North and South Vietnam said, we want to attack you, and the North told us, we're not going to attack you either, let's have a truce. Well, what we didn't know is that North Vietnam lied to us. And basically using the weapons that we used, like tanks, everything like that, they set up to attack more than 40 sites in South Vietnam at the same time on January 31st, 1968. Basically, they were able to capture Hue, the old imperial capital, for 15 minutes. They held part of the American embassy grounds in Saigon before we were able to beat them off. Now, at every single place they attacked, the U.S. beat them off. We beat them. They faced us head to head. We beat them. Even though, like Hue, that took about a week for America to win back. But we won at every single point. But here in America, remember, back then there were only like 3 television stations, and Walter Cronkite, one of their leaders, after attack began, he basically said that America could not win Vietnam. And so what is the reality for America over here? Well, Johnson falls to only 35% approval rating, despite everything he did. Now, just to show you the reality of what's going on, for every single Viet Cong we killed in Vietnam, it cost America $322,000. Meanwhile, for every American in a Great Society program, we spend less than $54 a person to help try and fight poverty. What are the results for Johnson? Well, Johnson shocks everyone when he announces in 1968 that I shall not seek and will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president. In other words, he knows that he's not going to be able to win. Y'all ready? So the crescendo of the 60s. This is kind of the hippie movement. They're all kind of like a family. They lived on an old film lot where basically the owner told them that, hey, if they maintained the area and picked up everything, that they could stay there for free. They do drugs, have sex, listen to rock and roll music, the whole hippie thing. Well, kind of all like a family. You can't see the picture of the guy taking the picture, though. That's their leader. Who's their leader? Oh, here he is, Charles Manson. A guy that's the Manson family, his followers, who he later got to kill actress Sharon Tate and her unborn child, as well as 2 other people, because he was trying to start a race war and had them writing human blood, death to pigs on the wall. The book Helter Skelter is about it. And recently Quentin Tarantino did a film, something about Hollywood, I think. Anybody know it? Anyway, at the very end of the movie, there's something about Charles Manson, even though it's totally fake and totally fiction. But for that, he's arrested, taken to jail. He's still being held for life because they no longer have the death penalty in California. In 1968, you have leaders being assassinated like Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, the Kennedy that actually did care about civil rights and probably was the strongest influence on his brother, Robert. He was running for president and he gets shot and killed in California. Ready for the next one? So who do the Democrats choose? Well, they choose Hubert Humphrey. And basically, the Democratic Party is very disjointed. You have so many little groups, each vying for their own little spheres of control. At the Democratic Convention, which was held up in Chicago, they had protesters. And Dealey, the mayor of Chicago, he didn't want Chicago to look like a city of disorder, so he had his cops go out and violently subdue the protests. And that's all going out on TV. It looks like chaos. Meanwhile, the Republicans, They have a very quiet convention down in Miami. Who's their nominee? It's Richard Milhouse Nixon, who basically, since he lost to Kennedy, had spent the next 8 years building up his political power base. And basically they promised a return to stability and order. But there's a potential monkey wrench in the works. George Wallace. He also is a conservative, kind of like Nixon. And he's running as an independent. Now, what's the possible danger of George Wallace? Well, I'll ask you this in a different way. Y'all remember Biden got the nomination of the Democratic Party, right? Were all the Democrats happy about that? No. There were a whole lot of other people that supported another guy. Bernie. And they were like, Bernie, you go and run as an independent. Yeah, because the Democratic Party did kind of screw him over because he was winning. But we're not going there. But what would have been the ramifications if Bernie Sanders had run as an independent? Would that have hurt Trump or would it have hurt Biden? It would have hurt Biden. Guys, Wallace running as an independent, it's going to hurt Nixon. And Nixon barely wins, but he does win. You can see here's all the states that Wallace took. Most of the deep south. So we had President Nixon. Now, for everybody who thinks that Nixon was this harsh conservative, if you actually look at the guy, he wasn't. Why do I say that? This guy had to play to the political center. I mean, he's the guy that brought us the Environmental Protection Agency. He's the guy that brought us the Office Safety and Health Administration that put in codes for the workplace. He brought us the National Traffic Safety Board that said that cars had to have like seat belts, that bumpers had to be able to sustain a certain mile per hour impact. He spent lavishly on social services and environmental initiatives. It's like people who say that Trump was a racist, when he gave more money than anybody had ever before to historically black colleges. Ready for the next one? Nixon also supported the Family Assistance Plan, which would have given a guaranteed annual income to every American family. Now, some people could argue that the reason why Nixon did that is because he knew that it was going to lose, but it looked politically smart. But to consolidate his support, he put conservative nominees to the Supreme Court, which were totally turned over by the Senate. He even supported the Philadelphia Plan, which basically, y'all know what affirmative action is? What is it?
Just like people to get into schools.
Well, not just people, women. Basically, historically repressed minorities are given preference over others to redress past wrongs. And basically, the Philadelphia Plan was kind of like an affirmative action for the trade unions, because the trade unions had historically been against minority advancement. And of course, the trade unions totally rejected that. Now you have a new Supreme Court Justice, Warren Burger. So it's the Burger Court. And the case of Swan versus the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education, he rules that it is okay to take people outside of the area of one school, to take populations and transfer them to another school if you want to create a more diverse student body. Did people react to this well? No. Up in Boston, you had parents taking their kids out of school, put them in a private school. You had parents fighting off the integration of their schools with holding like American flags. Here in Texas, we got a little thing known as Robin Hood. What's Robin Hood? Y'all don't know what Robin Hood is? Plano is deeply affected by it. Highland Park is deeply affected by it. Your school district doesn't get all your money. Some of it's taken away to get into poor districts. That's Robin Hood. Take from the rich, give to the poor. Well, that was, oh, by the way, it's totally unconstitutional and ruled so by the Texas Supreme Court. But our legislators haven't done anything about it yet because that's a good way to make sure you don't get reelected. In the case of San Antonio v. Rodriguez, basically Rodriguez said, hey, I live in a poor school district. It's not fair that I'm getting a less of an education than the guys that live in Alamo Heights, which is a wealthy school district in San Antonio. That was actually, the laws, and Texas's laws was actually upheld by one vote. Meanwhile, we get into Nixon and détente. Now, Nixon had a Secretary of State by the name of Henry Kissinger. And just like we did under Kennedy, all right. All right, so Nixon and détente. Now we're getting into kind of our foreign relations. Basically, his Secretary of State was Henry Kissinger. He continued a lot of the same, because it's still the same guy, you have a lot of the same policies that were carried through with Johnson. Basically, we undermine governments deemed dangerous to American interests. But underneath Nixon, we change our approach to the Soviet bloc. We used to treat China and Russia like they were the same thing. Well, now we treat them as two separate entities. For example, with China, we start going through what's known as ping-pong diplomacy. Now, the reason why it's called ping-pong diplomacy is because in American University, their ping-pong team was invited to play at a Chinese tournament. Well, you need permission from the State Department to go to a Chinese country, and when they contacted the State Department saw this as an opportunity to send some diplomats along and to begin having talks and negotiations with the Soviets. And by 1972, our relations with them is thawed. This perhaps causes Moscow to also want friendlier relations with us, and they signed the SALT Treaty, which limited tactical nuclear warheads. So the Cold War is thawing a little bit. Ready for the next one? Well, Vietnam and Watergate. What happened in Vietnam under Nixon brought his popularity up to about above 61%. But that's with Vietnam, and then you have Watergate, and it comes crashing down to where his approval rating is just a little above 20%. Now, Nixon in Vietnam, the first thing he does is he announces that he has a secret plan to get us out of Vietnam during the election of 1968. And after he's elected, we find out that that secret plan is Vietnamization. What's Vietnamization? It's basically, hey, look, it's Vietnam's war. Vietnam needs to fight it. You know, it's South Vietnam's war. South Vietnam needs to fight it. They're ready now. And we're going to start withdrawing U.S. troops. Ready for the next one? Well, we do have anti-war protests going on over here. Like at Kent State, National Guardsmen shoot into a group of anti-war protesters, killing 4. At Jackson State, the anti-war protester is actually shooting at the National Guardsmen. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, you have a squad that had lost like 28 men during the Tet Offensive, bringing their numbers down even further. They know that there's VC in this one village of My Lai, but most of the Viet Cong aren't there. They run away. They do find some old weapons, and out of frustration, they open fire on the villagers. So these are civilians. They kill about 504 of them, including 182 women, 17 of which were pregnant. Also, 173 kids were killed. 56 of those were infants. So it's not looked upon that great by those over here in America. But in 1972, we're able to sign the Paris Peace Agreement, in which America announces it's going to withdraw all of its troops from Vietnam. Now, we do promise South Vietnam, hey, look, we're still going to support you guys. For every bullet you use, we'll give you another bullet. For every helicopter you lose, we'll give you another helicopter. You know, kind of one-for-one deal. So when we leave Vietnam, there's a North Vietnam and there's a South Vietnam. So we didn't really lose Vietnam. Next slide. Well, what brings, and that was incredibly popular. Well, what brings all of this crashing down? It's Watergate. Now, Nixon was a guy who was obsessed with secrecy. He didn't like other people knowing information that he knew. And a book was released called The Pentagon Papers that held within it some classified material of what the Pentagon was up to. This really made Nixon mad, so he hired G. Gordon Liddy. G. Gordon Liddy was a guy that when he was little, in order to get over his fear of lightning, he chained himself to a tree during a lightning storm. But basically he got together with a squad of guys, and these guys became the plumbers. Why did they call them the plumbers? Because they stopped leaks. Well, the election in 1972 was gearing up. He did not want to lose again, because remember, he had lost to Kennedy. He barely won against Humphrey. And so he ordered his guys to break into the Watergate Hotel, which is still in Washington, D.C., because that's where the Democratic National Committee had their headquarters. Well, they break in and they get busted by security, and then the White House tries to cover it up. Now, I don't know how much Nixon was actually responsible for ordering G. Gordon Liddy and the guys to break into the hotel, but this is one of those, it was the cover-up that got him. And see, that's one of the things. How many presidents in U.S. history have we had impeached? One. President Clinton. What did he get impeached for? He got impeached because he lied to the court. What did he lie to the court about? He lied to the court about having a sexual liaison with Monica Lewinsky. And see, the thing is, if Clinton had just said, you know what, yeah, I'm really sorry, you got me. I did have sex with them. And I hurt Hillary, I hurt, Americans are really forgiving people. They probably would have said, they may have thought he was a creep or a jerk, but after 2 weeks of, he wouldn't have gotten impeached. He lost his law license. Well, maybe the same thing would have happened with Nixon. Had he said, hey, look, I didn't order these guys to do it directly, but it's looking kind of bad. Because Americans are real forgiving people. But they didn't do that. Indeed, they tried to cover it up. Woodward and Bernstein, two reporters who I believe for the Washington Post, work really hard, follow up the money trail, and make the connections. Well, by August, so Congress then says, hand us over your presidential tapes. because every president since Franklin Roosevelt has recorded the conversation they've had in the White House. Now, why would a president record their conversations in the White House? That's like, why might I record my conversations here? A record of what? Like, I already know most of my lectures, but what's important that I might record? Well, like, I might want to be recording, so I say, hey, why did you come into my class late? And then you tell me, oh, well, I had a flat tire. Oh, well, that's okay, then it's not going to count for anything. Or if I say, why did you come into my class late? Oh, just because I felt like coming in late. Oh, I'll mark down, ooh, she had a bad attitude, or whatever. Which, of course, I wouldn't do. But, so you have a record. That's just like the president. If he's promising the president of Norway that they're going to do some trade deal, of what his expectations are, as well as what the representative of Norway was. Well, the legislative branch, every conversation there is recorded. So, they wanted to get to see what conversations was going on. Nixon totally refuses, saying that that's an executive privilege. It goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court tells Nixon, hey, buddy, you got to turn the tapes over. Nixon finally does turn the tapes over, but 18 and a half minutes are missing. Still, to this day, we have no idea what was on those 18 and a half minutes. And they were spliced out. So by August of 1974, the House Judiciary Committee gets together to begin the impeachment process. Richard Nixon, however, resigns. I'm going to quit before you fire me. The response to this is you have like Frank Church, who releases the Church Papers that basically were a slam against the CIA, causing a cutting back of the Central Intelligence Agency's powers. And what's funny is that you think, because everybody likes to paint Richard Nixon as this like arch conservative that had to be destroyed. Well, the effects on liberals and liberalism, or today we could call it the left, we really, after Nixon is gone, we really don't have a strong liberal president until some people could say Obama. But he was really more centrist until kind of the last half of his second term. Joe Biden is definitely very progressive, is what I think they like to call it now. So that's a long time.